Now, live from Whitney Media, 1460 WVOX, the Greenberg Report with Greenberg Town Supervisor Paul Feiner. You can join in the conversation at 914-636-0110. Now on 1460 WVOX, here's Greenberg Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Town Supervisor, and today we have a really interesting program. My guest is Richard Dresser, and Richard is a playwright, a screenwriter, a novelist, and a teacher, and he's had works performed all over New York in regional theaters and in Europe. And he wrote a novel called It Happened Here, and it's a history of an American family from the years 2019 to 2035, dealing with life in a totalitarian state when you still have Netflix and 2-day free shopping and all you've lost is your freedom. It was released in October 20th, and I am very, very pleased to introduce you to Richard. Richard, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here, Paul.
I was so interested when I learned of your book this fall. It Happened Here, because the United States, everybody was worried that our country was descending into something closer to a totalitarian, state. What made you write the book?
Well, it started out of anger bordering on rage about over a year ago with just what was going on in the country. And I started writing these kind of rants about just about what was going on. I sent them around to friends, and they said, you should put these together in a book. But I didn't want to do that because the rants were sort of satirical, and I think in a certain way we're sort of past that. We're in a much more serious place, and the satire just sort of normalizes terrible things that are going on. So I ended up figuring out who was delivering these rants and then building the characters around it. And as you say, it's an American family. It's an oral history, so it's all in their voices. It's a series of monologues, and it covers, they're looking back from 2035 on the 15 years that we're facing. So it's my sort of anticipation, speculation, conjecture of what's ahead for us. And it came out before the election, and a number of people, the frenzy and the anxiety was so great at that time, they didn't want to read the book until after the election, because what happens in the book is actually very close to what is happening right now. It's an unsettling book on a certain level, but it's a hopeful book on another level.
Right. Do you feel that now that President Biden is in office, that the risk of being a totalitarian state is going to go down, or do you think that the nation's democracy is still at risk?
I think it's very, very much at risk. And actually, I don't believe that the great conflict in our country now is between left and right. I think it's between reality and unreality. And I think that the Republican Party, led by Trump, has stirred things up with sort of the big lie that he won the election. So we had a president of the United States who inspired an attack on the United States, a terrorist assault. And since then, there were a few days where it seemed there was some measure of contrition from Republicans, but that seems to have dissipated, and now there's this frantic support of him. And I mean, the numbers are there, and I have no doubt that he will not be found guilty in the trial, the impeachment trial. What that means is a large part of the country, certainly a large part of Congress, is siding with somebody who does not believe in democracy and who has a lot of sway in the country. So I feel that the coming years are really going to be about sort of reasserting the truth and reasserting the rule of law, which has really fallen by the wayside. I mean, I think that's where we are right now.
Right. How long did it take you to write the novel?
Well, it didn't take that long because I found constant inspiration 24 hours a day in what was going on. But it's what I want to say about the book is it's not a political satire. It's really about a family. And I think one of the tremendously difficult things that we're facing now is that there was a time when political differences...
Take a break right now, and then we'll talk about the book right after the break in about 5 minutes.
Okay, sure. Great.
Paul Feiner, Greenberg Town Supervisor. We'll be right back.
WVOX. Now back to the Greenberg Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenberg Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Paul Feiner, and today we have a really interesting guest. Richard Dresser wrote a novel, It Happened Here, and it really is a scary novel because it really highlights what's happening in the country right now. Our democracy is something we just cannot take for granted. So, Richard, could you maybe just tell us a little bit about the play?
About where the book, where it came from?
Right.
Yeah, it's really about a family that's divided by the great partisan divide going on in this country, and it's how, in the past, it was possible to have political differences, but we're living in a time where political differences are really perceived as existential. It's sort of the zero-sum game that Trump has, which is you have to lose and I have to win. That's the only way the game can go. And so in this family, over 15 years, they split apart. And the reason I consider it a hopeful book is they find ways to reconnect with each other. And I recently did an event for this book, and I had actors read different parts in the book, and I had a family therapist there, and it actually was great because so many families are dealing with this. How do you deal with these differences with people you love? And it can go from 0 to 90 in moments over Thanksgiving when somebody says something, and all of a sudden you see them in a different light, and you react or overreact, and family relationships are ending, and I think it's just a very, very difficult time for families in this country. And when you add the pandemic on top of it, we're all squeezed in together, and we're forced to play out this drama of the politics in the country. And that's really what the book is about, and it's all told in the voices of the characters. There's no narrator guiding you through, so it's all these different voices that add up to a single story of an American family.
Right. Could you tell us about some of the different voices?
Yeah, the central characters are, it's two brothers, and it's in a Midwest university town. Basically, it's modeled on Madison, and one of them is a history professor, and his brother served in the military, and their father served in the military, and the brother now runs a security company, and they come out of this particular period of time really at odds as there's a movement against sort of liberal professors in the universities and heightened security. And actually one brother ends up at one point arresting his history professor brother, who ends up going to jail. So there's a deep chasm in this family, and the cousins who were once close are now sort of driven apart from each other, but they actually find each other through the bonds of the family that run deeper than the politics. It's not that anybody abandons their beliefs. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think it's abandoning beliefs. I think it's finding a bridge between people. But having said that, I think that what I said before, I really believe, which is we have a huge problem with the truth. There used to be a shared objective acceptance of objective truth, and we don't have that anymore. We have such a huge part of the population that, for example, believes that Donald Trump won the election in a landslide, and we have a lot of very cynical people in the Senate and in Congress who know that Biden won, but see this as an opportunity for them to hold on to power and maybe get those 74 million people who supported Trump behind them. So it's a very complicated time, and I'm not sure how you get the truth back in the currency of the country. It's almost like if somebody has been in a cult, how are they deprogrammed? And I think what's happening now, there are certainly a lot of Republicans that are horrified by what's happened since the election, and there are a number of people in QAnon that are sort of falling away. But QAnon is a perfect example of people who are not living in the real world at this point, and that's an issue. A democracy cannot survive without the truth.
Right. In your book, there's no villains, right, in the family?
No, there really are no villains at all, and there are things that happen that are extremely painful. It's not giving anything away, but one of the children gets involved in some, well, it's sort of a terrorist act, but it's trying to do the right thing, and it drives the families further apart. But ultimately, you're absolutely right. There are no villains, because I don't think we're living in a time of villainy among the American people. I think we're living in a time of deep division, and I think our only hope is to try to see the humanity in our fellow citizens.
Right. In your book, the Weeks family was divided along ideological lines. Elections were canceled, and then the president becomes a leader for 16 years. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's if you think back, and it's not that long ago, but it seems a long time ago, before the presidential election, November 3rd. The summer before that and leading up to it, there was such anxiety, and it seemed like, as I say in the book, of all the most important elections ever, this was the most important. And what happens in the book is there is a huge demonstration in Washington that turns violent, and out of that, the word Trump never appears in the book. He's always referred to as the great leader. The great leader has a national address in which he says that he knows and has found out that voting has been compromised, and it's impossible to have a free and fair election, but it can be solved, and the election is going to be delayed by 1 month. And some people watching it, like one of the heroes of the book, Paul, the history professor, he and his wife know exactly what that means, that democracy is slipping away. But his brother's family believes that, yes, this is what's necessary to hold on to our democracy. So they both feel that they are doing the right thing. But what happens is the election, once it doesn't happen on November 3rd, it's always a few months away. And this keeps going, and then when the great leader has sort of consolidated his power, he has an election. But it's sort of a Putin-style election where he knows the outcome before it happens. And that's how we live, how they live for the next 16 years. And
we have to take another break.
Now, back to the Greenberg Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenberg Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Town Supervisor Paul Feiner, and my guest today is Richard Dresser, who wrote a book, It Happened Here. And Richard, could you tell us, before I forget, how people could get the book?
It's at a number of local bookstores, but also you can get it at Amazon. It's easy to get. It's around.
Right. So you were talking about the great leader who, for 16 years after he canceled an election, ran the country. What happened during those 16 years?
Well, during those 16 years, life is still comfortable for people who have money. As I've said about the book, you still have, Netflix and 2-day free shipping and everything, and all you've lost is your freedom, because it is a totalitarian state. But it feels like the good times are still going on for a lot of people. But for somebody like this, the history professor, he ends up losing his job because he's too provocative. The press is sort of, in any totalitarian state, the press serves the leader, and that's what happens here. There's still all this entertainment. There's and so it's a kind of nightmare where it looks like the country that we love, but it isn't. And that was kind of my point in writing the book, is just how fragile our democracy is. And I think that it's what's going on every single day right now, hour to hour, it's being put right in front of us, how fragile it all is. And there's a character in the book, actually Paul's wife, who says, we keep saying this is not who we are, but every day we prove this is exactly who we are. And that's actually, I believe that that mob that attacked the Capitol carrying a Confederate flag, which had never been in the Capitol building before, there was a great percentage of white supremacists in that crowd, and I think that this puts it right in front of us, the racist history in our country that we have to face, and we can't say this isn't who we are. It is who we are, and we need to deal with it. And I think that's the positive thing that can come out of it. And it certainly has been building all last year with Black Lives Matter and everything. And I think, for me, that's the really positive development in that until we deal with the racial issues in this country, we are cursed, and it's all coming to a head right now. I mean, it's an incredibly consequential time to be alive. And I teach screenwriting at Columbia, and I tell my students, you are the essential workers. Your mandate is to tell the truth. Democracy can't survive without the truth. This is what we need. And I think for writers, for artists, it's an incredibly exciting time, because historically there are times when things really change, and we're in that moment of change, but of course we don't know which way it's going to go.
That is so true. Was there any outside influences? Some people disagree with me, but do you think, for example, in the United States, that say Russia may be encouraging through social media, encouraging all the white supremacists to rise up and attack the Capitol? So could part of what's happening to the United States be in some ways orchestrated by or encouraged by outside forces?
Absolutely. And I think there's no question that happened in 2016. There's a reason why Paul Manafort was handing very sensitive voting data to the Russians so that they could zero in on those counties in the swing states. But you're making a larger point, which I agree with, which is, and there were a lot of rallies that were organized. It was later discovered they were organized from outside the country. They were organized by Russia, and Russia clearly, their agenda clearly was to get Trump elected. But I think their larger agenda is chaos. It is to make our life chaotic and to prove that democracy doesn't work. And it's why for the last 4 years, Trump having such a cozy relationship with Putin was really disturbing and really, really hurt our country in ways that I don't think we can yet comprehend. Because I think you're absolutely right that social media is a big part of this. And, during the Cold War, the threat was very different. And people were afraid of, nuclear weapons, of course, which are still a threat. But the threat now is much more insidious because it creeps into our homes and into our lives. And it's certainly how QAnon took over so many people's lives. And, when I read about that, it's so similar to what happens in cults, where your whole view of the world gradually shifts and you lose friends and you lose your family, and it's this obsession with a single thing. But I think you're right. I think Russia is a major player in all of this. But having said that, they wouldn't be able to do it unless it existed already, unless there were white supremacists that were ready to come out and just needed a little nudge.
Right. Well, that's what I was saying to my wife. I said, you could have, with the Black Lives Matter, 90% of the people who have protested, during the Black Lives Matter that I know are, not violent people. They're decent people, and they just want to express themselves. So you could have different types of protests. 99% of the people could be peaceful, law-abiding people, and then you could have somebody spurred on by an outside force who throws rocks at windows.
Yes.
All of a sudden, you have a mob mentality, and then people who started participating because they were looking to express themselves, then they join the crowd. And I'm sort of wondering if you feel that that's something that's possible.
Yeah, I think that's what happened with a lot of the Black Lives Matter protest demonstrations last summer, was that they were sort of, particularly at the end of the night, there was looting, there was breaking store windows, stuff like that, but that was not the characteristic of the actual protest, and who knows who was responsible for that. But we do know that, like, that kid who shot somebody, 18, 17-year-old kid who was driven there by his mother, he was a right-wing kid who went in there and was trying to be a big shot. So the violence, what it did, the really unfortunate part of it was that now those protests are being characterized as violent, and they were at the time. Trump was certainly characterizing them that way, and for the most part they weren't. They were peaceful demonstrations, and the violence came for the most part, from other places. And we're living in a time of such profound false equivalencies that people are making a comparison between the attack on the Capitol and the Black Lives Matter protest, which is just absolutely a ridiculous comparison. It's one is protesting police shooting black people, and the other is an attack on our government.
Now, back to the Greenberg Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenberg Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Supervisor, and this is a very interesting program. It happened here, a new novel by Richard Dresser about our democracy. And I was going to ask you, Richard, you mentioned that in the book, in your novel, families may have differences, and in the United States, some families may also have differences, and it really is dividing families, and some people aren't talking to each other. I'm just curious, are there any members of your family that have different political views?
Well, I think that we certainly have different political views, but we line up on the side, I would say, of reason and struggling for the truth. There are people on my wife's side of the family that are very much convinced that the election was stolen, that Trump won in a landslide, and we all get together in the summer, and depending on the pandemic, where we are with that, I expect we'll get together next summer. We all go to this place in Canada, which I actually referenced for the novel. The family ends up there. But it'll be interesting because in all the years I've been going up there, we've never had any serious political conversations. But I feel like now we almost have to, because we're so on different sides of it, and there are people. If there are people wearing red MAGA hats, it's going to be an issue. So I see them. I see that what they say on Facebook, and I think, wow, it is happening in my family, but it's not people I deal with on a regular basis.
Right. If you saw somebody. Let's say you knew somebody in Hastings or in Greenberg, and they, wearing a "Make America Great," hat, and were visibly for Trump. Could you see yourself being a friend to them, even though you have different political views?
Yeah, I could see having different political views, but I when people go down the rabbit hole of it's a fantasy world they're living in, there's no basis for friendship there. I have to say that in Hastings, there's not a great danger of that. I think in Hastings, if you're not driving a Subaru, then you're suspect. So I think that there's most people line up on one side of it, with a lot of differences in that side. But it's not about. I don't run into people claiming that the election was stolen.
Right. There's maybe like a few people. There's every time I've gone to these protests, there's one person who starts yelling and screaming. But Hastings is almost like Berkeley.
Yes. Exactly. It's a friend of mine who is conservative, who lives, but not crazy conservative. He lives in Hastings, and he said, the thing about Hastings is it's like being in college. He said everyone's a liberal, and I have to say, it is kind of true here in Hastings.
Right. Well, I lived in Hastings for 12 years before I became town supervisor, and I feel that it's like an amazing, community because it's so progressive and people like to argue and they're very issue oriented, and every couple years there's another wave of new activists that replace the older activists. It's just a very interesting, community. I was going to ask, you're also teach at Columbia University Graduate Film School, and you've been president of the Writers Guild Initiative, and I'm wondering what advice you would give young people who want to go into the career of writing or playwriting.
Yeah, well, I would say if there's anything else that will make you happy, you should do it, because it's very difficult. It's hard to get traction. It's hard to make a living. Having said that, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I am, it's my life. I wouldn't trade it at all. I would never try to convince somebody else to do it. And the reason to do it is if you are driven to do it, if this is the only path you see to having a rich and fulfilling life. And at Columbia, they're graduate students. They're from all over the world. They're from China. They're from Spain and Turkey. And I love it. It's all on Zoom now, but for 3 hours, we're all in that place together. And they're people that have really committed to writing as a career. But if you're considering doing it, I have very few rules, but one of them is write every day, even if it's for 15 minutes. It's better to write for 15 minutes every day than to wait for that magical day when you're going to write all day, because that day will never come. If you write for 15 minutes every day, you're really writing all the time, because it's in your head. You're writing 24 hours a day. A lot of my writing happens when I'm out riding my bike or whatever it is I'm doing, hiking, whatever it is I'm doing. I'm not in any way being discouraging about this, but before you decide it's going to be a career, make sure that you are really committed to doing it, and then see how far you can go. It's a great way to go.
I was thinking earlier, in this program, when we were talking about your book, It Happened Here, and you mentioned that even though our country in your novel lost its democracy, people sort of lived, they were able to go to restaurants, they were able to go to movies, they were able to go to theater. Life sort of continue to go on. They just lost their democracy and freedoms. And you teach some students from China, and they probably are experiencing the same thing right now, where China has very modern buildings, the economy is good, but they've lost their democracy as well. Have you spoken to some of the Chinese students about your book and about their experiences comparing China and the United States?
Well, I talk about politics at the beginning of every class, because my belief is that whatever you're writing about, you're writing from this moment, from this historical moment that we're all sharing. And I talk about American politics, and they've asked me about the book. I do not pursue it with them, their political situation, except when it comes up in their scripts, which it does in different ways, because I don't want to put any of them on the spot in terms of characterizing things a particular way. But when it comes out in their scripts, we have great discussions about it, and they're really wonderful, for the most part, wonderful writers. Their approach to story is different, and that's one of the reasons I love teaching there, is with international students, we're teaching students from all over the world, they come at stories quite differently, and it's a huge education for me. So I'm learning from them, and they're learning from me. But it can get touchy talking about their political situation. I give them the opportunity, and they say what they say, but I don't push them on it.
Right, and they're probably a little nervous.
Yeah, they have reason to be nervous, I think.
That's right. So in the remaining few seconds, are you, in 15 years, do you think we'll have an election for president?
Yes, I do. I happen to be an extremely optimistic person, and I think one of the great things that's coming out of this time is it is really politicizing the country. People are really finding out what's going on, and I think there should be a strong conservative party and a strong liberal party, and I think the Republican Party is blowing itself up right now. They're going to be split down the middle, but I think out of that, we need a strong conservative party, and I think it's very positive that people are paying such close attention to politics, and like your friends marching for Black Lives Matter, getting involved in a way that they weren't before, perhaps.
Really interesting, and good luck with all your future efforts.
Right. Thanks very much, Paul.